Pretty poor. He came in on a platform saying that he was going to end a lot of our involvement militarily in the Middle East, and he's only furthered a lot of our involvement. His use of drones in killing people, even an American citizen, without warrants, all of that being considered, I would say his performance is pretty poor.
And part of the reason I'm asking this, the poll that was released, Obama was considered, among millennials, it was kind of a whole new low in terms of how many millennials supported his performance. So I was curious kind of what you guys thought about that. Anyone else want to chime in on what you think?
I mean, I suppose, like, on the whole, there are some, Obama has some accomplishments that he can be proud of, I think. Obamacare, for all of it, the mess, for how complicated it is, starting to show some real results with, increasing the rate of the insured, getting people are now getting access to health insurance that they previously were not able to afford. I think with Dodd-Frank, you now see the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau is finally starting to really kick into high gear, and I think that's sort of solved some issues with our economic crisis. But so, and again, like, I think history in that regard will ultimately be kind to him. That being said, Obama came in with with the potential of being something of a transformational president, of someone who would sort of like maybe like FDR or JFK before him, someone who could sort of really harness the energies of the American people and really get people excited about getting involved in the political process once again. Yet, as president, he's really governed in a very like aloof, technocratic manner that has, I guess, it's hard to really put this into words, but I guess that has really disillusioned and disenchanted a lot of people, and I guess squandered the mandate that he had when he came in 2008. I mean, part of this isn't all of his fault. Some of it's the way Congress works. I mean, especially with the frequent use of the filibuster. That being said, let's just say, like, I guess in short, while Obama has accomplished some measures that he can be proud of, in the end, I don't think the actual accomplishments measure up to, at least to the expectations that his presidency began with.
I think overall, Obama has performed as would a president in his circumstance. I think one of the reasons why it's so polarizing for him right now is just based on the initial ideal of change, especially transformational change, coming over from President Bush, which for many, if not most, liberals considered to be one of the worst presidents. I definitely won't go that far, but for those liberal-leaning believed that this was supposed to be the transformational presidency, with that consideration as a decline, and then an upheaval with President Obama. And where most of that polarization comes from, I think, is the fact that presidents really don't have, I mean, just for the American public, considering that the American public politics altogether, as far as like the very, outside of the fundamental nature of politics, it's that presidents really don't have as much power as people think. Kind of going over to Adam, is that your name, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. Kind of what Adam was saying is that Congress has a lot more control than the President of the United States as far as what bills are being passed and what's going on and what affects, especially in particular, states. And when people started to see that we came over from what many consider to be a quote-unquote bad president to a president that can't really initiate the changes that he's promised. Many of those things, Guantanamo Bay is still open. As Adam stated, not Adam. Someone else stated that many of these wars are still going on, or more wars now than we were in the past. But I think a lot of it comes from the fact that largely it's not the president of the United States that makes those choices. NATO and the U.S. Armed Forces has a little bit more control than we'd like to think, and even alternatively, there's a lot of political ideals and conceptualization that we can't understand outside of the scope of the President of the United States. And there's just so many things that the President just doesn't have control over, no matter who he is, no matter if he comes in and says he's going to change the world and change all these kinds of policies.
Blame lies on both sides because the way the system is designed, there's supposed to be consensus for the government, but for the government to be able to work. People have to give either way, and it seems that in the current climate, no one is willing to do that. You can say that conservatives aren't willing to give on anything that Democrats are pursuing, but it's likewise from the other side. So blame does fall on both.
Like enough Republican equivalents of blue dog Democrats, so to speak, to really forge a compromise or forge a consensus. So in that regard, it's like, yes, our political system operates on consensus. That being said, I mean, how far are you willing to let one side just completely have one side's extreme wing completely just dictate the agenda? So I mean, it's kind of complicated. I think a lot of it deals with like how just far to the right the center has moved. Oh, I've made myself clear.
No, you didn't. Robert, what do you think?
So Adam, what you view as the defining points between the right and the left? So where do the right and the left differ ideologically, in your opinion?
Like, I guess in a general sense, I mean, like you would say that. I guess like on a purely theoretical sense, you would say that like the left generally, is for more government involvement in the economy, but less involvement in maybe social or personal issues, whereas with the right's flipped. That being said, at least for many years, at least for many decades, even under Reagan, Bush, and Clinton, you've had at least some overlap insofar as it was saying, well, okay, maybe say one side wanted, like at least like example when I said like that, a Republican proposed I think it was a Republican who proposed the cap and trade plan. It's like there was enough consensus to agree that the issue of global warming and climate change was a problem. The issue the differences was how to really deal with that. It was whether or not we want like a direct government intervention or we want a more market-based system, which was what climate change, which is what cap and trade was. So it's like there was enough consensus, at least, between the left and the right, up until recent years, on like what the problems that this country was facing. But now it's almost as if like the left and the right are living in completely separate worlds. So it's like, even though like there are like definite philosophical differences, there should at least be enough sense of both sides to realize, at least to agree, what problems this country is facing, so to speak.
I guess an example of that I can think of to jump in for a second would be immigration. I think both sides this year agreed that something needed to be done with the immigration system, but the ideas on both sides differed so much that we couldn't really kind of reach a consensus. What do you guys see? What would you wish that your representatives would do? How would you hope that they would handle it in the future so that they can kind of like fix this issue?
The issue of immigration?
No, not immigration. Just like this whole concept of like a political gridlock beyond just like compromising. Is there something that you wish that they would do, or do you think that there's something that needs to happen to kind of fix this problem?
I think there's too much focus on the individual topics that people miss the greater like ideologies behind these different statements. So rather than focus on what are the ideas behind this statement or that statement, they're just picking different hot topics. So what is the idea behind healthcare in terms of the size and scope of the government? What is the idea behind our involvement in the Middle East in terms of the size and scope of the government? Because from my perspective, I don't really see an ideological difference between the right and the left. Both favor expanding the size and scope of the government. It's just where do they want to expand it. So I see no real difference between the right and the left. They're just wanting to expand the government one direction or another. But ideologically, both are perfectly all right with expanding the size and scope of the government.
Thoughts, anybody?
Does anybody else want to go? Or?
You can go, Adam.
Okay.
Jump in
Well, I mean,
there.
I guess part of it, in terms of gridlock, I guess, at least this is like in terms of gridlock or the functioning of the American political system, is that it's our system. Not only is it built to facilitate consensus, it's built to discourage the whole idea of party discipline, meaning that like you have instances where you have like where it's like Boehner can't even control his own caucus in the House because he has to deal with the Tea Party rebels, even though he's nominally like the leader of the Republicans in the House. Meanwhile, like back in the early part of the decade, you had issues with blue dog Democrats trying to, I guess, essentially undermine, like let's say, the president's agenda on healthcare or financial regulation. So, and granted, like I'm not saying that like those voices shouldn't be heard. It's just that the lack of party discipline, like in America's political system, as compared to, let's say, like a more parliamentary system, it sometimes makes like political calculations difficult when it comes to like passing legislation, because you have to, party leaders can't really just crack the whip and the members will fall in line. I mean, there's no institutional basis for that, at least not anymore. So now it makes, like, unless that institutional basis can be built, then it makes, I guess, legislative calculations very difficult. Because, like, especially in the Senate, where you have where you have like instances such as like mechanisms such as secret holds or other parliamentary techniques that can stall legislation.
Yeah, and I think everyone now is going to Washington. Every politician is going to Washington and with the mind that they want to win. And this gets back to the heart of the issue of compromise. You have someone like Ted Cruz who shuts down the entire government just because he doesn't want the debt ceiling raised. And that can't happen when you have people unwilling to cede on anything at all. They just want a 100% victory or nothing. Income inequality is obviously ever present in a capitalist system, but if you look at the level to which it has gone in the last couple of years, it's insane. And you're starting to see all types of problems just arise from it. And I think in the coming generation or so, it's an issue where the problems arise slowly, so it's not as evident now as it will be in the next couple of years, but it's definitely one of the biggest issues facing our generation.
I was thinking, I don't know what the biggest issue, but one of the biggest issues for the United States is income inequality, yes, and just wealth disparity in general. But I would say even especially educational disparity, which kind of goes within the same realm as wealth disparity. I think, was it for the first time, is it last year, maybe last year or the year before, we reached nationally 80% graduation rate for the United States, which is definitely better than most of the world. And it's slightly below average for developed countries. But when you think about the fact that typically those graduation rates, which lead to many, many more things that would carry this conversation on a lot longer than it needs to be, is typically the way that it operates is that your school has about 99% graduation rate or a 40 or 50% graduation rate. And in many areas, if y'all are familiar with like dropout factories, which are schools that have graduation rates of 40% or less, those are not only your highest crime, but highest violence, highest in pretty much any negative statistical category that you can think of. And those areas have the lowest economic indicators, the lowest political index indicators, and just leading to so much disparity that really goes on and carries out throughout the rest of the United States, which I think for many communities that are able to ignore it, those areas that are closer to the 99%, by 99%, I'm talking about like actual graduation rate, that it's felt as if it's not affected because we just kind of look at statistics in general. We don't see so much like the variation rates and all those kinds of things. Most people aren't really concerned with it, but the education disparity in the United States, and particularly for developed countries, is one of the widest gaps, really, in the entire world. To where actually really is, I think, one of the largest issues today when I really think about it, because the fact that post-secondary education, as far as being affordable, is something that's becoming more and more out of scope every single year because the rates are exceeding inflation at a rate that is just becoming absolutely unfathomable. I remember just before I attended TCU, my father doesn't understand a whole lot about college or anything, but the only thing he remembers is that my uncle went to a state school in Texas in the 70s. And so to him, he thinks school still costs $300 a semester. And so when I went to TCU, which, is a private school, he gave me, what does he give me? He gave me $150. He said, hopefully this will last you the first couple of months. And I remember that was about the cost of my biology book, a used biology book. And just, considering, I don't know if y'all have had the chance to kind of look at just the scale to which it's increased versus inflation. So basically the rate for which it's actually literally affordable.
Yeah, saw that.
Yeah, I can't even, it's so hard to really to understand just from how it's been since I think the mid 70s, the early 70s, mid 70s, and where it's going for the next 20 years. It's becoming a point to where only certain classes, I mean, it kind of always has been to some capacity to where only certain classes could afford it, but it's becoming to a point to where only your highest political, social, and economic class can actually afford to go to college, outside of those that are fortunate enough to gain scholarships. But those rates are also now exceeding the levels for which colleges are considering to provide for scholarships, because
Too many people are going to college today. When you try to make everybody go to college, then a college degree today is what a high school diploma was 20 years ago. And so you make it the new minimum requirement. Whereas if people are going to college just to get a degree so they can get a job, I mean, most jobs out there don't require a 4-year college degree. And I think that we're hurting a lot of people by forcing them to go to a 4-year program and getting themselves into a lot of debt. I think that colleges and universities are expanding their program too much to accommodate more people going in. That's why we have so many more degrees nowadays that didn't exist 20 years ago. So I think we're doing a lot of harm by making a college degree the new minimum standard.
Yeah. I mean,
Jonathan, you disagree?
I don't know how I feel. I do know how I feel about that. I think that. Well, I don't think. I believe that. I think it's kind of dangerous to say that too many people are attending college because as you said, that it's becoming the minimum requirement, and considering that graduation rates pre-1975 were pretty close to 90%. And if this is the minimum requirement, and far less than 50% of the population are reaching this minimum requirement, it's very obvious that it's necessary. And if it's necessary and it can't be afforded, and you say it's the minimum requirement, there's very obviously a problem if we can't reach this minimum requirement today. And there's very few for those that don't have the political and social connections to be able to obtain employment through whether it's family businesses or connections without having a degree, your options are infant. They're so minimal that it's difficult to consider. You're outside of your kind of retail and restaurant and restaurant management, etc. You don't have very many options with only a high school diploma if you don't have that social and political capital. So for the vast majority of the U.S. population, without that degree, an associate's or a bachelor's degree, you're essentially destined for poverty. And that leads to far more concerns than the fact that the minimum requirement is the bachelor's degree. And I agree with that. The minimum requirement is the bachelor's degree. But if that's the minimum requirement and that's not being obtained, then there's obviously a very big problem.
But why is that the minimum requirement now? It's only the minimum requirement because we've pushed so many people into getting a college degree. That wasn't the case 20 to 30 years ago. And so
it always was the
minimum requirement beforehand.
Yeah, it always was the minimum requirement for people who were looking to go on to these really successful careers. And what has been happening is it's just opened the door for a lot more people to be able to get to these types of careers, the next level. And so when we say that it's dangerous for people it's dangerous that a lot more people are going to college, I believe that it's so much better that we've opened the door.
But you said it opened the door for these more successful careers. Are there more of those careers out there, or just more people for those careers?
I think it's pretty much basic economics. I remember I was talking to someone the other day, and they're talking about if we raise everyone's income by 20% or 10% or whatever the case may be, everybody would be better off. When everyone who knows anything about economics knows that's absolutely not true, because then all prices would raise that exact same proportion. So obviously nothing would change. Now, what's happened since the 60s and 70s is that more and more and more people are going to get degrees. And therefore, those requirements are going to go along with the more people that are getting these degrees. So we had a time where only a very small percentage of people were going to get bachelor's degrees. And it was around 10-15%. We're getting closer to 20-30% of people that are getting bachelor's degrees, and therefore those organizations are raising their requirements. And as they raise their requirements, it makes it difficult for those people 20, 30 years ago who would have, just with a high school diploma, been able to get these relatively decent, paying jobs, $30,000, $40,000 a year coming in, to be able to obtain them. And now we're at a point where there's very few organizations that will take you outside of organizations such as B2B, sales, selling, well, mostly pretty much sales and retail. There's very few opportunities for people that don't have those degrees, who again don't have social and political connections. If your family, go ahead.
No, you made my point right there, because you said the only reason why this problem exists is because more people are getting college degrees today.
Mm-hmm.
You said that 20 years ago you could have gotten a good job without a college degree. But it's only because we've pushed so many more people into college that it's harder for those people without a degree.
Right. We also have a significantly more educated workforce in the U.S. population as a result. So I wouldn't go as far to say, as far as technology, that's why we've advanced as far as we have. And although overall, in many respects, the United States isn't quite as powerful as it was, we are definitely significantly more advanced than we were at the time. So I think on a microeconomic scale, I would agree with you that it can be a problem, but that's only given certain sections of society. So for the sections of society that have always had bachelor's degree, that have always had master's and doctorate degree, I suppose it would be concerning for them that there's more access for everyone else to be able to do it. But given that these people are shackled in debt anyway, they don't have too much to concern themselves with if we're talking on that scale. But it's definitely a positive thing that there's more, not quite equal access, but there's more access for the general population to obtain these degrees, and that the degrees have expanded beyond your professional, your business, and your law and medical. I definitely wouldn't consider that a problem.
Well, I think that there is a middle ground to be found here. I think that the issue, in terms of like the amount of people who are going to college, I think it relies on rethinking the definition of higher education as a whole. Like in the United States, like we're one of the only countries in which higher education really equals like a university degree. If you look at, you know, how other countries handle this, especially Germany, it's like you have, when they talk about higher education, they have multiple tracks. There's like the university track, there's a sort of a, then there's like a more technical track, which involves like like a part-time apprenticeship and a part-time technical school that, you know, is considered like just as good as a college, as a university degree. So in that regard, I mean, like obviously we can't become like Germany overnight. That being said, I think that the lessons that we can take from other countries is that perhaps at the very least, like, rethink the channels of higher education and try to see, you know, could we find something or create some sort of program that is just as, that could prepare people for a successful life without, even if they're without going through, let's say, the financial burden of a college degree.